What is happening, beautiful people? In the spirit of Halloween, I decided to share with you a little terror, a little horror, with a short story that I wrote called Blackwater Pharmacy. So, here it goes. Blackwater Pharmacy by J.D. Clare. Chapter 1. The Hunger. It's raining again, third time this week. The blue summer sky lost in a haze of white mist and heavy drops that patter as they paint the streets with a glossy sheen. I've been at this bus stop for nearly an hour, waiting. The hunger, the itch. I need my medicine. Exilipro. It's the only thing that brought me to this tourist hellhole. I used to get my supply from Dr. Cohn, a brown-haired, brown-eyed, brown underwear kind of guy. Until he disappeared, probably in jail for distribution. He told me he got the medicine from a small pharmacy on the coast, a once popular port town called Blackwater. It's nothing now, nothing but old shops rotted with salt, a shore caught between two voids, the void above and the ocean below. I guess if the buses aren't running on schedule, I'll have to walk into town. At least it's a warm rain. The path is simple. All tracks pointed to the coast, to the edge of the world where the emptiness calls. A breeze lifted off the lake and swallowed the land in thick ocean fog, heavy with the smell of fish. The roads were empty, with only the occasional car rolling by with its uncomfortable hum. Drivers here all did the same thing. They'd slowed to a near stop, staring intently out their window, considering for a second whether to help the poor soul wading through the wet wind or not, only to decide I wasn't the kind of person who they wanted to help. In no time, they'd be accelerating, disappearing into the distant fog. I couldn't say I blamed them. I was hidden within a hooded green jacket, one jacket too many for summer. Eating had become a challenge, and my face was beginning to thin into sharp angles. I probably looked homeless. I felt homeless. But I had a home. It just wasn't here. So as the next car crept by, looking to catch a glimpse of my humanity under the layers of hair, I kept my eyes forward, knowing they would ultimately move on. "Do you want a ride?" a stern voice called out. I turned to find a police car next to me. The driver was a woman. Her long, dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun. She had a kind smile. "No, thank you," I managed to get out. "Come on, don't be ridiculous. It's hell out there. Let me give you a lift." She actually stopped the car and got out. A stone formed inside my stomach as she approached the passenger side of the vehicle. I felt like I was being arrested, but I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. At least not yet. She opened the door, letting me in. I kept thinking it must be a trick of sorts, but she persisted. So where are you headed?" I had to think. I folded my hands that shook violently from the anxiety that rattled in my bones. I knew what I needed, but it dawned on me that it might not be altogether legal. Still, the destination was innocent enough. Kiefer's Pharmacy. "On Lincoln Avenue?" "Sure." "Thanks." "I'm Officer Katie Jacks," she stated in a boisterous tone. "Tom Cameron," I said, gesturing to myself. "Nice to meet you, Officer Jacks." "So what are you picking up at the pharmacy?" Something came over me. Guilt, perhaps. I couldn't give her the answer she was fishing for. So I said the first thing that came to mind. "Boner pills." I forced a smile. "Oh, She didn't know what to say either. It took her a full minute to break the lingering awkwardness in the car. "So, do you live around here?" "I'm staying at a place up in Bartlett." "Bartlett, huh? And you walked all the way here from Bartlett?" "Well, I tried taking the bus, but they must be off today because I haven't seen a single one." "Yeah, it's a union thing. The buses went on strike a few weeks ago." It would have been a huge problem for peak season, but it's been slow the last few years. I could tell. And they assigned you to be a taxi cab? No, nothing like that. It's just days like this, with the rain, are pretty peaceful. Calm. I had the time and I figured I'd offer a little help. Well, thanks. So what do you do, Mr. Cameron? For a living, I mean. Used to be in construction. Now I work in a warehouse. Nothing wrong with that, Officer Jack stated with a motherly assurance. I never said there was. I shot back as though she was compensating for thinking less of my work. The rest of the car ride was pretty quiet. Officer Jax would begin to say something and pull her words back, being extra mindful to not offend. We pulled up to the building sandwiched between a bookstore and a fish fry restaurant called Don's Dock. Large posters of a pale, androgynous man in heavy makeup hung in the window. Thanks, officer, I said, opening the car door. A rush of oily fish-fried salt air poured into the vehicle. The smell enticed and repulsed me at the same time. No problem. I'll be right here when you're done. You don't need to do that. You don't need to wait on me. I'll be fine from here, I tried assuring her, knowing I wouldn't want to ride from the officer with a potentially illegal substance in my possession. She smiled kindly, baiting me to accept, so I smiled nervously back at her. I'll call a friend to come pick me up. Really, it's no problem. Okay, she said with apprehension. I'll swing back around in a half hour or so to check on you. Don't go running out into the rain or you'll catch your death, she joked in her naturally maternal tone. I smiled and nodded before pulling the long glass door open to the sound of an alerting brass bell and cold air. Chapter 2. Rotting Inside. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed inside the outdated store. The smell of fish clung to every breath as though the rattling air conditioner was pumping wind directly from Don's Dock next door. Wooden cabinets had thick layers of dust that covered dirt, while metal wire racks were overflowing with tourist guides that must have been printed in the 90s. Penny candies were welded together by soggy sugar and yellowed plastic containers at the front of the small store. A tall, thin old man wandered between rows of pills in the back, while a gothic girl waited impatiently at the counter. Don't steal anything, she said rudely. I'm not, I shot back. She was a strange girl with piercing, judgmental eyes that peeked through the frames of jet black dyed hair. She was so pale you could nearly see through her. Her necklace dangled. It looked like the face of a compass with the letters N-A-M-O replacing the N-S-E-W. It made me uneasy. Bingo! Excuse me, she exclaimed with offense. Your pentagram. It says Nemo. Bingo was his name-o. It's not a pentagram. It's the crest of Ammon. What are you supposed to be, a witch or something? She grimaced. Or something. Oh. Sorry. I looked down at the moldy, cracked tile. I'm here for my prescription. We only accept prescriptions directly sent from Apothecary, Sacred Rose, or Sycamore Grove. It's from Dr. Cohn. He works at Sacred Rose, I whispered, showing her the piece of paper once given to me by Dr. Cohen with my script written sloppily across it. It's a special prescription. She held it for a minute while I looked around. I could tell she was thinking about something. I looked down at the cracked flooring. Says you need Xylopro. Really? That's some strong shit. I don't think they sold this anymore. They don't. It was recalled a few years ago. You are the only pharmacy in 50 miles that still has it. Figures. Have you tried Zoloft or Xanax? Yeah, nothing else helps. You a veteran or something? Must have seen some serious shit. Workplace accident. Lost a guy on my crew. He was new. Didn't know what he was doing. Faked everything. Afraid to get in trouble for not knowing how to lock the boom cylinder on a 30,000-pound excavator. The hydraulic system failed, and the large metal arm came down, crushing the guy in half from the crotch to his shoulder. She leaned in with delight. That must have been terrifying. Trauma like that salts the bones. Yeah, I was the only one there. Couldn't help. Have a hard time sleeping now. So if I can get my medicine, please? The girl tapped the counter, contemplating what she'd do next, as if there was some sort of calculated effort she needed to sort out. She turned, facing a wall of missing children's posters in a way that made me uneasy. It was as though she was suggesting that I had something to do with their disappearance. I looked away, finding a sign above the counter that read, "God bless," with an odd, piercing photo of good old Uncle Sam staring down his pointed nose with an angry glare, a crown of stars and stripes on his warp-top hat. "God bless," I said, pointing up at the sign. "Ugh," the girl rolled her eyes. "Dr. Kiefer, need the Exilipro from Mr. Cameron," she yelled behind her. "Okay, Lorena," the man called back. Lorena leaned in. "You know, your Exilipro isn't going to last. I bet you're already starting to notice that the more you have, the more you need." "Yeah, it's getting worse." "I have something else that could take the edge off. At least stop your hands from shaking, if you're up for it." My stomach turned inside out at the offer. The itch, the hunger became more pronounced, as if the squirming worm inside my soul knew something I didn't. Something that could help me stop the shaking. My palms began to sweat nervously. "What about the old man?" It takes him forever to do anything." "All right, but we gotta be quick." Lorena shot a flirty glance with just the faintest hint of insidious excitement. "Meet me in the back," she said. I peeked out the window to ensure Officer Jacks had driven off. All was clear. I exited the store through the long glass door, ringing that obnoxious bell once again. Pulling my hood back over my head to keep the rain out of my face, I walked around the strip of stores to the back alley. The alleyway was wide and littered with rocks, glass, and a single shopping cart sitting under a drooped awning that swelled with overflowing rainwater. The sight of bodies peeking out of the dumpster startled me for a moment, until I realized they were broken mannequins. Their faces were gnawed away, and it was apparent that the trash hadn't been picked up for some time. Dangling from the cart was a single child's shoe, whose lace was caught on the plastic flap of the seat. I never understood how a child could lose a single shoe. Wouldn't they notice? Lorena pushed open the back exit of the pharmacy, lighting up a cigarette almost immediately. She didn't step out into the alley, but leaned just far enough to blow the smoke into the rain. "So?" she baited. "So?" I replied. "You brought me here. What do you have?" I asked, pulling my wallet out to show I was serious. "I saw you ride up with Officer Jacks." She didn't have to finish the thought. I knew she was implying that I was on the narc end of our business deal. "No, it's nothing like that. She saw me in the rain and insisted she'd drive me." "It doesn't matter. The fog's coming in. That means there's not much time." The girl bent over to grab a glass flask wrapped in a tarnished silver with a circle and claw insignia. The container was larger than what Dr. Cohn would send me. However, when I twisted it open, I found a glass eyedropper connected to the lid dipped in a black tar. This was nothing like the pills I was used to. "What is this? A liquid? Dr. Cohn gave me pills." It's the same thing. Xylopro is made from the ground down Gosha seeds. This is a concentrated version of the seeds. You just have to measure it out yourself with the eyedropper on the lid. How much for the bottle? I don't know. Just give me what you have. I don't want the stuff anyway. It makes me freak out. I handed her a stack of cash, probably around $200. Dr. Cohen charged twice that for half of what I was getting. She seemed happy enough with the deal, shoving the cash indiscriminately in her pocket without counting it. Probably stole the Xylopro anyway. She put out her cigarette by rubbing it against the brick wall before flicking it, and then turned back inside, shutting the door behind her. The itch. The hunger. I had what I needed inside my hands to make it all go away. Officer Jacks would be back soon enough, but I needed to decide if I could wait or not. Before I could fully contemplate my situation, I found myself huddled under the drooping awning with the open bottle in my hands. I took a pinch of the eyedropper and dropped it into my mouth. It had a metallic taste like rust, but dissolved almost instantly on my salivating tongue. I melted against the brick, bent at the knees, feeling the electric relief wash over my body. My skin and bones tingled as though a new energy had entered my soul. It was as though the world itself had begun to change. A cloud of darkness swept across the alley as though it were covering the remaining light of the sun, already hidden by the gray rain sky. For a moment, everything was dipped in a beautiful black gloss. The rain slowed to a delicate dripping, like piano keys tapping, until fading to a soft static. That's when the sinking began. I heard the soft whimper of a child right beside me. It was then the dangling shoe caught my eye again, now swinging from the grocery cart swallowed in rust. Something was coming out of it. Something long. I reached for the shoe, taking it in my hand to examine what was emerging. It was a leg. The leg of a child torn off at the knee, filling the shoe toes first. I could still make out the faint whimpers, as though the child was still present. But there was nothing. That was when the angry roar of a fog siren screamed out into the empty sky. Chapter 3. Side Effects. The alley had been stained with a thick darkness as though the heavy cloud was made of ink. The fog siren rose to an incredible roar as the whimper of the disembodied cry competed for my attention. And then, everything stopped. The siren, the child, and finally, the ever-present static of the rain ceased. All at once, a heavy hush engulfed the alley in the belly of an unknown void. It was as though I could finally see the world the way it really was, beyond the filter of the flesh, the sight of the spirit. Any sense of warmth that had once come with a summer shower had crisped to an uncomfortable chill. My only instinct was to get help, any help. I stumbled out from underneath the drooping awning, accidentally spilling its contents as my shoulder pressed against the bubble. I could feel the warm liquid sink into my pockets. Where water had once been was now a dense, putrid yellow bile slapping hard on the pavement. I paused just long enough to catch the glimpse of entrails squirming within the goo, as though it were still alive. The knot in my stomach turned like a key, releasing vomit to add to the new stew. Tink, tink, tink. Metal clanks pushed out dense as body parts rose from the bucket of the dumpster. They were pale, grotesque, their gnawed limbs severed from the mannequins' emotionless faces. Their hands clawed at the air with desperation, trying to swim their way into the sky and escape their rusted steel grave. "Help!" I yelled, banging on the pharmacy's back door. "Lorena, help me! I think something's wrong with the Xylopro you gave me. It's not supposed to be like this. Lorena! Lorena!" was no answer. I had to do something. I ran, gasping for what should have been the sweet summer breeze, but instead was replaced by wafting sulfur. My lungs burned as I took the corner onto Finney Street, hoping to re-enter the pharmacy from the front. Lorena! Officer Jax! Dr. Kiefer! It's Tom Cameron. I was just in your store. Someone help me! My ranting stretched into the fog, absorbing into the void. Everything was different somehow. Where glass once lay as the barrier to the store was now only a chain-link fence. I took hold of the knots of twisted metal and pulled to enter. A tinge of crushed brass rattled, as though the bell that once annoyingly alerted the shop of entry had been stomped and restruck. The pharmacy was destroyed, as though it had been the battleground for a great war. Fluorescent bulbs were now ropes, burning from the center wick to tint the store in a dancing orange glow. The old tourist pamphlets littered the ever-hideous tile floor. That was when I noticed something strange about the little paper. Where a generic ad for a local business had been before, now was the image of a bloodied man tore in two from the groin to the shoulder. I threw it back to the ground and shouted. The sign that once read, "God bless," now read, "What God?" And the picture of Uncle Sam was now a full severed goat head with the uneasiest hint of a smile. I heard a clatter among the darkened rows of pills in the back. Hello? I slid behind the wooden counter, now rotten and splintered. I saw a body too thin to be the insufferable Lorena, who I was sure was hiding from me after the terrible prank. Dr. Kiefer, I think I had a bad reaction to my medicine. I need your help. The body moved slowly towards me. Sharp buzzing noises rose like a click, click, click of hard, bony heels against the floor. Dr. Kiefer? I said, stumbling back. The thin body inched forward, wobbling heavily as though he couldn't keep his own balance. It's not good to be here, the old man's voice trembled back. I need your help. I bought some... I chose my words carefully to not expose Lorena's side business as a drug dealer. I took a drug. I'm not sure what it is. I think I'm dying. You need to call Officer Jackson. Take me to the hospital. It's not the drug, son. The pharmacist came into full view. He was undressed, nude, skeletal. His body was raw and red, with chunks of flesh missing in patches. He was tall, with pointy features, as though he was hunched. Most notably, with the tailbone that extended forward beyond the front of his body between his legs, coming to a sharp syringe point end. It was inhuman. A monster somewhere between a man and a wasp. The lenses from his round glasses glowed with a fiery light reflected in them. It was coming for me. I stumbled backwards in terror. Dr. Kiefer paused. Can he see me? Lorena stepped forward. I gave him the blood of Nefarious to help us. Similar to Dr. Kiefer, she had been altered, body pulled long with her black-lipped mouth framing a hideous fang-filled grin. The filter of the flesh has been lifted, her voice squeaked with excitement and arousal. You're monsters, I shouted. Whatever it was I had taken was causing me to stay in a hyper-alert and aware state, making every awful image before my eyes that much more horrible. Dr. Kiefer twitched with insect-like surveillance. There is a rottenness in us all. Every man has his demons, just as every demon has his man. Do you know why 1/3 of the angels fell? I contemplated, thinking back to the long past teachings of Sunday school. Because they wanted to be like God, I squeaked. No. The old man slammed his fist on the counter. They were like God. They wanted to be higher. The spirit without limit will crash into the abyss. Like these drugs, they were meant to help people, bring them to where they belong, level out the imbalance. There is a great imbalance in this world. Look, I don't know what's going on. That bitch gave me something and I'm tripping out. I need help. He stared hard at me and grumbled with indoctrinated wisdom. The book of Job says, therefore snares surround you, and sudden peril terrifies you. It is so dark you cannot see, and a flood of water covers you. Is not God as high as the heavens? Look at the highest star, how lofty they are. Yet you say, what does God know? Does he judge through the thick darkness? Clouds veil him so that he cannot see as he traverses heaven's horizon. I searched the words to make sense of any of what he preached. What are you saying? God can't see you here, lost within the fog. You are between voids, drunk on the blood of Naberius. Every demon wants his day, Lorena added, and Ammon is coming back. Tripping over the debris, I rushed from the grinning faces and glowing eyes. I didn't want to be there anymore. I pushed the gated door with the metal screech and found myself back into the silent streets. I needed to get away. Anywhere would be better than where I was. So I ran. I ran until I was exhausted and then pushed further through the pain in my chest, running a few blocks more. Uncertain if I should scream or cry, I collapsed on the curb, hoping to compose myself. Help! I cried out. No answer. I reached into my pocket to find my phone was damp, soaked from the liquid bile that had spilled from the awning. Still, I had to try. The screen lit, then flickered. The sharp hum of an ear-piercing static rose to painful levels until it finally popped and went dead. That's when I saw it. A light. A quick orange flash in the distant dark. One. And another, signaling what I could only hope to be an emergency vehicle. It was fading as it moved further away. I had to do something. Hey! Over here! I shouted. The light paused for a moment, as though changing momentum, and then grew as it made its way in my direction. Chapter 4. Lights. As the light came towards me, I could just barely begin to make it out, one part at a time. At first I thought it was a car, but as it approached, I could see it was something else. A lopsided monster made from the disjointed body of a man with multiple sets of long, bent legs crawling like a spider. That's when I heard the slurping. It had something in its grasp. Children. One child was being dragged behind along the jagged road, while the monster held the other up to its oblong head, piercing through its skull with a barbed straw-like tongue. They were juice boxes to the beast. Long, suctioned breaths were followed by deep, gulping swallows. I could see blood weaving down the system of tubes that led into the glowing stomach that flickered on and off like a lamprey. I didn't know if the child being dragged was alive or dead. I wasn't sure if I should try to save them or run. I didn't even know if I could save myself. The insect's twisted body lurched forward. A hulking beast with children clutched in its long, cruel fingers. Its bioluminescent chest lamp pulsated as blood trickled down its dark roots through the light. The drink, the first child, was finished, pulled in by the pressure of a powerful vacuum and left without contents. The lamprey tossed the limp body aside as though it were weightless. The other child, however, was very much alive. I could see her now, being lifted by her leg until the monster could take hold of her with both hands in preparation of the straw-like tongue to puncture. She was a little girl, 12 at most, but her stomach was stretched and swollen with a basketball-sized bump. She was pregnant, fully pregnant. Had to be the 9-month mark. And yet, she didn't even look old enough to have a period. My blood boiled as I considered what lecherous hands harmed this child, and chilled again as the gravity of both of their impending deaths sank in. I had to help. "Hey!" I called out to the demon. It turned, looking at me in contemplation, then disinterestedly continued to prepare its snack. Instinct kicked in. Without consideration for my own well-being, I found myself running towards the beast. I had nothing but my bare hands, but I needed to do something, anything. I couldn't have these deaths on my conscience. Leaping onto the pulsating body, I wrapped my arms tightly around its neck. It dropped the child. Thank God. I squeezed my bicep against its throat, hoping to choke it, but the hold had no effect other than to oppose the will of the creature. Those monstrous dagger hands slashed back at me, tearing through my green jacket and clothes that acted like Kevlar with the heavy wetness. However, I still managed to feel the sting of the wayward cut breaking through. My body stretched in pain, letting the monster loose from my grip. I hit the ground and quickly stumbled to get back to my feet. I shifted sideways, circling the monster as it circled me. My foot found the child on the cement, but I couldn't look down to check her condition. From the corner of my eye, I could see the pulsating light coming towards us, hidden in the dizzying fog. Soon there would be more of them. I stood between the two bodies, pulling my green jacket off with the plan to wrap the monster's head and blind the beast. I held it out in front of me. It lurched forward. This was it. Bam! 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 I dove to the ground hard and fast to avoid the spray of gunfire overhead. A reaction to the sudden and powerful gunshots that echoed off the abandoned streets. The monster fell as the light inside dimmed and then extinguished permanently. The other lights continued to pulse, but that's when I recognized them for what they were. Emergency lights. Police lights. "Officer Jacks?" I called out, still caught in a haze of confusion. "Officer Jacks? Mr. Cameron? What the hell is going on here?" The voice was familiar. It was her. I don't know. I broke down, nearly weeping. "I just wanted medicine. I'm sorry." "Look, you need to pull it together. We will get through this," she said sternly as she looked over me. "Oh my God, you're bleeding too." "Yeah." I took a deep breath as I regained my composure. But the girl, the monster had the girl. "Is she alive?" "I think so," I answered weakly. "Wait, is she pregnant?" Officer Jack's eyes went wide as she bent down to check on the child. "Looks that way." "Get her in the car," she urged. I scooped up the girl, wrapping her in my coat, as Officer Jacks led the way to the police car. It was parked 20 yards away from where it all happened. I must have been so involved in the fight for my life that the sound and the engine were lost in the jumble of heavy breathing and horrible slurping of the child-eating demon. I laid the child in the back seat carefully. She was unconscious and bleeding from her stomach. Lifting the folded coat to see, Officer Jacks exposed the girl's round belly, finding a mangled and sloppily stitched stomach. Something was in there, moving. We need to get her to the hospital now. Chapter 5. The Hospital. Officer Jack sped off, me sitting beside her and the child laying across the back seat in critical condition. I tried looking out the window, but the ever-present fog swallowed everything, leaving only the faint shadow of nearby buildings to guide as landmarks. Sweeps of black shapes rushed past in the swirling red and blue lights. What was that? What was that monster? Officer Jax interrogated me. I have no idea. The child, who moments before was completely unconscious, began to writhe in pain. She struggled with desperate pants of breath to hold down the agony. It's almost time. The barrier is thin. Ah, it hurts. What do I do? I called to Officer Jax. See if she's bleeding. I can't tell. It's too dark and impossible to get back there with this cage, I said in frustration, leaning into the metal net between the front and back seats. That's kind of the point of it. Please help me, the child continued in agony. What's your name? I yelled to her. Can you tell me your name? Reese. Her little voice trembled. Reese. Who did this to you, Reese? I asked, hoping to sound as sympathetic as I felt, while simultaneously grinding my teeth in preparation. She looked off and paused, shaking as she held back the pain long enough to find her words. God gave me this baby. Reese, God wouldn't do this. I wasn't the first, you know, but I gave everything for Ammon to be blessed. I was stunned. What can you tell a child in the midst of their suffering? That it was all wrong? That someone took advantage of her only to cause some serious mortal wounds? That her God was a lie? It hurts. My baby. You have to save my baby. Apothecary Hospital, please. You gotta stop and help her, I demanded. She's dying. No, I have to get her to the hospital. Jax was level-headed and determined, but I was falling apart. Children shouldn't be in these situations. Reese's shirt lifted, and I could see the skin tears along the stretched, stitched flesh. She was bleeding. A lot. I wanted to jump in the back seat and help, but I couldn't. We were all helpless in that car. Officer Jax had no choice but to drive, being the only person capable of navigating the shrouded, foggy world. The trip lasted less than 6 minutes, but it felt as though it dragged on through the night. We arrived at Apothecary Hospital. The large, white plaster building blended in with the fog as though it were meant to be lost in the heart of Blackwater. Had it not been for the black iron rod gate with arrow spikes at the top, I doubt even Officer Jax would have found it. The building was unwelcoming, shaped like a box with sharp edges and sunken dark windows. You get the girl, Officer Jax commanded, as she stormed out of the vehicle and ran into the building alone. I jumped out, opening the door to find the entire back seat soaked in blood. The girl was barely alive, just twitching on nerve impulses. I scooped her into my arms, feeling the warmth in her dripping, blood-stained clothes and the chill on her pale skin. I entered to find the interior of the building abandoned. I don't know what I was expecting in this nightmarish town, but I'd hoped that someone, anyone, could help the little girl dying in my arms. And yet, not a soul in sight. The lobby was filled with the same thick fog that permeated the streets. A sour miasma burned my nostrils. Officer Jax! I shouted. Nothing returned. I figured she'd gone ahead to give a detailed description of the help we needed, but it was empty. I rushed down the lobby through the halls, shouting for help. My desperate pleas echoed, with only my hurried footsteps responding off the bare walls. I saw a sign, second floor, operating room, and intensive care. There had to be someone to help, or at the very least, some kind of medicine. I was half tempted to give Reese a pinch of the Exilipro in my pocket, but I didn't know if that medicine would kill the pain or her baby. The only chance we had was to find someone. I reached the cold, rusted elevator that squealed in defiance as it found its path from the higher floor back down to 1. It was a risk getting in, but I was tired, and time was not on our side. I had to take the chance. I pushed the circular number 2, which lit up, and with a heavy jerk the cables rolled taut, pulling the metal box into the air. I finally had a moment to take notice of the layers of mold that crusted in the corners. Free penicillin. The green jacket I'd placed over Reese's stomach slipped off as I struggled to readjust my grip. I could see her stomach branded with a seal of some sort, a circle with the letters that closely resembled a compass. Seeing it reaffirmed my anger and the urgency to get this child medical attention as soon as possible. She was badly cared for, bruised and dirty. Her clothes were ill-fitted, and her wide-shouldered shape and her thin, stringy blonde hair that was so unwashed I mistook it for a brunette at first. The elevator shook as it came to a stop on the second floor. The doors creaked open to reveal an even darker hallway lined with long panels of rusted grating, as though time had long since decayed the living body of the hospital interior. Faint hints of orange light twisted like fire. I didn't know where I needed to go, so I began trying each room. The first room was empty, the second littered with medical supplies and debris. It was then I noticed the ICU in the middle. I had to try. I opened the door, calling into the dark room, and there they were. 2 patients in the corner, both women in blood-soiled gowns, their heads wrapped in filthy gauze, with only their horrible, wide mouths filled with smiling fangs exposed. One was tangled in an assortment of wires and tubes. "Holy shit!" I cried out in horror. As I spoke, they roused to the noise and began approaching. I was almost comforted by the sight of someone, anyone, but as they drew near, the same unsettled feeling I had in the presence of Dr. Keefe settled in. "Hello?" I said, hoping to reason with the hideous duo. They only moaned in return. They were holding scalpels, and I was holding the girl. Chapter 6. Intensive Care. I yelled for help. "Officer Jax!" The patients twitched angrily as the volume of my voice drew them in. Officer Jax wasn't coming. Not this time. I couldn't leave the room, never knowing when they'd be behind me with the scalpels ready to end my life. I had to put the girl down. I had to put them down too. I quickly searched the room for something I could use as a weapon, anything at all. I settled on an IV drip stand. It was light, but the length of it would help me keep the staggering bodies from reaching me with their blades. I jabbed at the one with protruding tubes, hitting her in the chest with the wheels and pushing her back. The second one stepped forward, and I couldn't push her off, so I swung the stand like a baseball bat, knocking her down as the metal bent. She moaned with a soft, erotic pleasure. I raised the twisted pole over my head and slammed it down again and again and again on the patient's head until the wheelbase broke off entirely. The patient with the wires and tubes had made her way to me, jumping on my back. She was warm and wet, stabbing the knife into my shoulder. I roared in pain, throwing her off of me, holding the broken metal stand firmly as I pushed the rod through her stomach, stapling her to the crumbling plaster wall. Her legs twitched, toes curled, and with another erotic wail, her body fell limp. Picking the child up from the sticky ground, I pushed our way back through the door. I was certain the only occupants I'd find in the hospital were the scattered monsters that left only one terrifying option. I had to take the girl to the operating room and save her myself. Believe me, as far as options go, this was the very bottom of the list. But she was solid white, pale, hardly breathing. It was probably too late, but I couldn't let this be the end without trying. I had to try. I stormed the operating room and laid the child on the table, lifting her shirt to expose the stitched impregnation. I rummaged through the chaotic condition of the room, looking for alcohol or anything to attempt sanitization. I found a bottle of alcohol, though it could easily have been gasoline and I wouldn't have known the difference in the chaos of the situation. I poured the burning liquid over her stomach, as well as my hands. I needed a knife, a scalpel. It was still on my shoulder. My adrenaline had been at full force and I'd nearly forgotten to remove it. I pulled the knife out, pouring the alcohol over it to turn the red metal silver again. This was it. I leaned in, point ready at the splitting sutures. "Wait!" yelled a voice. I looked up, finding a man and a woman. "What?" I pulled myself back away from the table. "Who are you?" I should have been relieved, but their demeanor was too calm to comfort me in the hectic time. They were clean. The man was wearing a gray blazer atop light khaki pants, and the woman wore a long blue-collared dress. "Reese is our child," the woman said. "I am Morrigan, and this is my husband, Stefan." "Oh, thank goodness you're here. She's dying. She needs help. A monster had her. Put something in her. Please help her." Stefan shook his head in displeasure. "A demon is trying to prevent the miracle birth. Surely its time is close." Reese is fulfilling God's purpose," Morgan stated, matter-of-factly. The child's stomach continued to lift and bend from the inside out as the thing inside squirmed. "Praise Ammon! The baby is still alive!" "What? What are you talking about? Your kid is dying!" Stefan mimicked Morgan's sentiment. "It is the will of God." "What? No! No God would ever do this!" I crumbled under the mental conflict of what they were saying. I wanted to hit them. I wanted to slash at them with the knife I gripped tightly in my hands. But I couldn't. Exhaustion set in, and all I could do was fall to my knees. "Perhaps some," the woman lectured. Some worship Naberius, the great wolf, but we are the servants of Ammon. Naberius' soul is perched on the throne of darkness with many devils to serve his will. But it is prophesied that one would be born within the breath of God's fog. That's why Reese was chosen. His child will be the new heir, son born of a son, and we will complete the will of God. The weight of the words crashed upon me like an ocean. I could hardly tread the pressure of my thoughts as one fatal question rose to mind. His child? Who? Reese. The mother stepped forward. My son is the new mother of Ammon. But Reese is I looked at her, then at him. The young girl, her broad-shouldered boyish body wasn't underdeveloped as I thought. She was a he. Reese had always been a boy. The pit of disgust within my soul fell headlong into the abyss. That's why the child was stitched in. That's why his body swelled and twisted with unmatched pain. It wasn't a child in his body. It was something else. Chapter 7. Birth. The room was stained with a thick, wet darkness as though it were painted in ink. I squeezed my eyes shut amid the pain-filled wailing of a child's body rejecting the foreign entity that had been placed inside. That's when the sinking began. Blood and bile spilled onto the dirt-crusted floor as the poorly stitched stomach split open. Reese, the child, the poor boy, was being torn apart from the inside out as Morgan and Stefan watched in delight. Their eyes sparkled as a spray of blood freckled their faces. "It will all be over soon, my son," Morgan spoke with detached emotion. Stefan approached the boy, gently wiping the hair away from his tear-soaked face. Still on my knees, suddenly, the feeling of electric adrenaline washed over my body. I stood clenching my fist at the injustice of it all. Reese's parents were supposed to protect him, guide him, and love him. Instead, these sick-minded monsters had perverted their faith into something terrible and destroyed the innocent life they were entrusted to care for. "What did you put inside him?" "It is the son of Ammon, our god. He is being born." "Liar!" I yelled, shoving through the stiff bodies to get a better look at the child. Our eyes met for a moment, and then the wailing stopped. Reese went limp. The swollen split in his stomach continued to squirm with the desperation of a foreign creature. Something compelled me to remove the monster desecrating Reese's corpse. I reached into the split cavity and pulled it out. It was an alien. Something from another world, another dimension, created from the dark pit. Thin, long limbs folded over one another as a pale demonic being thrashed. The large black eyes opened with curiosity, soaking in my appearance before letting out an ear-piercing shrill. Morgan stepped between us, taking the child from my hands. "At last he is here, the son of Ammon. Isn't he beautiful?" It was then that the image of two worlds overlaid upon one another. The sight of the spirit was overlaid with the filter of the flesh. This alien child in my own hands was suddenly a goat, a baby goat with budding horns. None of this made any sense. The medicine must have been wearing off. Morgan and Stefan began laughing. "Stop!" I commanded. Their faces distorted with ghastly fang-filled grins as tar poured from their long-tongued mouths. The spirit of devils filled them, contorting their bodies into horrible monstrosities. "Stop it!" I yelled again, throwing my fist into the man's face. They both continued moving towards me, laughing. And then another voice began to rise. More laughter, this time coming from the mangled corpse of the boy. Reese sat up, spilling the crushed mess of his pureed insides on the floor, leaving a hole where the baby might have been. "Please stop," I pleaded. "Please!" All strength left my body as my legs crumbled, bringing me to the ground. The family approached, laughing louder and louder, the liquid dripping from their gaping mouths onto my face. Their echoes off the crumbling operating room walls transformed into disembodied voices. "Mr. Cameron?" yelled a familiar voice, far off. It was Officer Jax. "Where are you?" "Officer Jax?" I screamed. "I'm here! Help me!" "I'm right here, Mr. Cameron!" "I don't see you! There are bad people here, and they're laughing! The baby! I need your help!" Just then, a bright light poured through the double operating room doors as if an angel of God had been sent. "Do you see the light?" "Yes, I see it," I said, crawling to my feet. Quick glimpses of the alley came back. Bursts of a second world showed through the dark. I could see the shoe dangling from the cart where the laughing boy Reese was. The two bodies standing over me appeared to be Officer Jacks and the girl from the pharmacy, hunched over in the pouring rain. Then the glimpse was gone, and I found myself back in the hospital, walled in by rust and decay. "What do I do?" I cried out. "Follow the light." It was then a translucent sheet covered my body, my face. It was a body bag. I tried to scream, though the suffocating plastic pulling and jerking in the I tried to scream through the suffocating plastic, pulling and jerking in the struggle. The hospital room absorbed into the blinding light of a heavenly ambience, as though I were being led into the mouth of a star. And then the darkness swallowed. Chapter 8. Chapel. I woke to the sound of bells. Was I out of the hospital? Out of the wicked miasma? Was it all a warped trip of some bad drug sold by a scorned pharmacy clerk? I didn't know where I was, but I couldn't move, melted against the cold steel table, bent at the knees. Something terrible had happened, and now I was somewhere else. A chapel. Likely the chapel of the abandoned hospital. The filter of the flesh had returned, and I could see the world for the way I was accustomed, not by the soul. Light seeped through the angled windows, tinting the fog-filled room a soft alabaster. Hardwood beams and benches were sun-bleached. There was a crowd. Dr. Kiefer, Lorena, and Reese's parents were in attendance. An entire congregation had come to bear witness to the birth of their new God. Hey, what are you doing to me? Untie me! Let me go!" I demanded, pulling violently at the straps and shackles that held me down. "You tried leaving," Lorena spoke. She stepped forward with a satisfied smile, knowing that she had lured me like a fish to the hook. "After all you've done, we couldn't have that. We still need you." "Need me for what? You already have your God." "Amen blessed us with a vagrant," said Dr. Kiefer. "We see so few homeless people here." "I'm not homeless. I have a home. I have a family. And I was dropped off by a police officer for my medicine. People know I'm here." "No matter," the old man continued. "Ammon has provided, just as he has given us a child. He has given us you." I turned my head to find Reese's dead body slumped over an altar, the newborn goat nested on top. Holy shit! "And soon, Ammon will restore our town to its former glory," continued Dr. Kiefer. "He is sacred," the congregation said in unison. "Ammon works mysteriously," added Morgan, as she pet the goat atop her disemboweled son. "He understands all things, past and present, commanding great legions of demons." "Reese fulfilled God's purpose," spoke the clerk from behind the crowd. Bells rang in ceremony. The cleric stepped forward from within the heart of the congregation. He was a short old man, wearing long golden robes, with skin sagging from his face like wax from a long burning candle. The ceremony began as a woman brought her swallowed baby no more than 6 months old to the cleric. He lifted his arms at a fountain, smiling through his rotten teeth. The baby whimpered at first, which rose to a full-out cry of fear as the priest took the child by the head. It was then that he began speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It could have been Latin or Greek or the tongue of demons. The baby tried pulling away from the encounter, back into the sole comfort of his mother's arms. The priest's expression was grotesque, with a sense of sadistic delight. The way he held the head with both hands, the way the neck was bending in the struggle. I could see the devastation that was coming. The brittle cracking would be inevitable if something didn't stop the madness. "Stop!" I yelled. "Stop it!" "All for Ammon," the congregation chanted. Snap! The head came off, like the top of a bottle. Blood poured into the fountain. Once drained, the body was lifted high into the air as the assembly cheered. Bells rang as the ceremony continued. Then Officer Jacks. They brought her out, stretched out on a warped wooden wheel. Her hands and legs were tied down as if she was an assistant to a magic show where knives would be thrown at her. But she was nude, expressionless, drugged. Dark purple and red bruises were scattered along her throat and thighs. The Vitruvian woman awaiting the experiment of the soul. Did they have her all this time? Was she taken from the moment we'd arrived at the hospital, or were the distant calls into the bright light real? They led her to the center, propping her up in front of the fountain, her head towards the ground. "Officer Jacks!" it called. Her eyes lifted slightly, showing a sadness and shame. She didn't speak, but it was as though I understood her thoughts, that she was sorry she couldn't protect me or the child, that she felt inadequate for not being able to stop things from coming this far. She had been broken. A knife was used to carve off large sections of skin and meat, then dipped in the fountain of blood. Each member of the congregation lined up, one by one. The procession came forward to take and consume the meat in a mockery of the Holy Communion. They ate, not in repulsion, rather with a moan of pure bliss, as though they were savoring bites of a foreign delicacy, like they had been given a euphoric drug touched with ecstasy. Within moments, the once strong-bodied officer had gone limp, peeled down to muscle and bones. "What are you going to do to me?" Dr. Kiefer approached. "Ammon is going to be hungry when he arrives to see his son. You can't expect Reese's body to feed him. Look at the boy. His body is nearly torn in two. You can't feed a god scraps." "No, you can't do this to me. What the hell is that thing?" Morgan stood at the altar of the congregation, lifted her arms and proclaimed, "At last he is here. Our God is born, the son of Ammon, the great owl. His knowledge knows no bounds. He understands all things, past and present, commanding great legions of demons." "Please, I just came for my medicine," I begged. Morgan continued, "And isn't it fortunate to find someone with such misery? Ammon finds the trauma to be quite the seasoning." "No! Don't let him eat me!" Ah! Fear and anger spilled as a terrible scream. I pulled myself free enough to find the flask of tar within my pocket. Medicine. Maybe it would all go away if I just took my medicine. I opened the bottle frantically, putting the nasty liquid to my lips, drinking it in its entirety. My skin tingled as though a terrible energy had entered my body, as though the door had opened within my soul. A demonic power rose over me. It was hate. The strongest and most brutal sensation of hate I could ever dare to admit. I hated them. I wanted them all to die. The sight of the unfiltered realm returned. The hunger that brought me to Blackwater had returned as an insatiable craving, and the feast had just begun. I could feel it. The change. Bones shifted and pulled from their place with gruesome popping sounds. Thick fur poked from my skin like needles through leather. Fangs emerged along with a second head that grew out from the open knife wound in my shoulder. He was another side of me. A twin soul hiding within, boiled to the surface, demanding blood. I was the great two-headed wolf, demon incarnate. The cleric gasped in fear. Naberius! But how? Hammond, help us!
To hell with Hammond!
We growled, grabbing the cleric's face and smashed it into the floor. Bits of bone and blood sprayed out as we slammed his mangled flesh face over and over and over against the hard splintered wood. Warm liquid painted my arms red as the skull crunched under the weight of each blow. The son of Ammon! Morgan gasped defensively, throwing her body between me and the baby.
It's your turn, bitch!
We howled, jumping on top of the woman and thrashing her with our claws. Blood ran up her throat and out of her mouth in a joyful gurgle as we pulled the stomach and uterus out of her body, leaving a hollow shell. Then, the long razor claws that protruded from the ends of our fingertips found their way into the soft belly of her husband. I huffed through my fangs, trying to catch my breath. The two bodies mangled into a vicious mess at my feet. Rabid growls rolled in our throats. The cult began to panic, as the form I'd taken was a rival demon to their own, the god enthroned they had longed to usurp. Hell had come as I struck down the members of the Church of Ammon. Loud and horrendous cries filled the small room as fury spread like a fire. It was then, in the commotion, that my eyes found another familiar face beyond the crowd of cult members. It was Lorena, pulling out the stolen firearm she'd taken from the captured officer. Anger rose as our eyes locked within the outpouring cries. "Don't come any closer!" Lorena trembled, pointing the pistol at me. Naberius spoke from the Siamese wolf attached to my shoulder.
Eat her!
Bang! Sharp pain entered our chest. We growled again. Bang, bang! Two more searing holes tore through our body. She was shooting, but nothing could stop us. Instead, we tore the legs off of Morrigan and tossed them across the room at her. The beast took control as I leapt towards the Gothic girl, grasping her within my claws. Thumbs dug deep within her chest, piercing, stabbing through her lungs. She struggled and gasped until I dropped her, watching as she drowned in her blood. Satisfied with the judgment I executed, now was the time for the ultimate destruction. I grabbed the goat, the child, the demon born of a boy. All of its forms disgusted me. Your god dies. Our wolf heads drew their mouths wide around the newborn demon. The room suddenly became lighter. It was as though gravity had forgotten to exist, releasing all the objects and debris from their resting place on the floor. Everything began to float. The door opened to a radiant luster. A 10-foot-tall, pale-bodied entity entered with an angelic brilliance. A terror and awe flowed through me. Hammond! The remaining congregation gasped with reverence. The powerful being raised its long, thin arm, drawing the black-eyed baby from my grip, through the air and into its own long hands, the hands of its father. Ammon had come. The goat whimpered and bleated. More long bodies filled the lit doorway with their shadows as they crowded around to see the new child. Loud blasts of trumpeted horns shook the walls with excitement. The remaining congregation cheered. It was no manger, and these were no angels. But these beings were certain their king was for. Nibirius, the feral beast within, retreated within the presence of a greater evil. His wolf head falling from my shoulders, shed with the demonic fur that covered my sins, leaving only a dark void within my splitting soul. My flesh was weak, trembling. The chapel was illuminated from the inside out by the terrible Ammon and his angels. A burning glow stuck to every surface as Ammon slid towards me on his long serpent tail. "Please don't eat me," I pleaded. "Please." "Hush," the angel whispered. Warm clawed hands lifted me to an equal height, meeting the Ammon eye to eye. He leaned in. The fanged grin within his owl-shaped head opened slowly, showing a barbed tongue that pierced into my neck and began sucking the blood from my body. Long, drawn sips pulled my body inward amid the heavy pressure. Suddenly, I felt the sweet relief I'd come for. My hand stopped shaking. The anxiety within me drained, and all that was left was the fading chime of a ritual bell. Well, thank you very, very much for sticking around and listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's kind of fun, little experiment, reading out loud to you guys like this. I hope that you guys have a very fun and safe Halloween, and maybe I'll do another one of these if you guys like it. And I have a couple more that I could do. So just let me know, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.